I was born in 1932 in Sheffield. I was born prematurely, and my mother was very concerned that I might not live very long, so shortly after my birth she took out an insurance policy for my funeral, which I now have. But I survived. And I was very fortunate because Sheffield was bombed twice in 1940, and my mother didn't want to lose her son, having rescued him in 1932, didn't want to lose her son too early, so she sent me off I was evacuated to workshop in Nottinghamshire, and I lived with a maiden aunt and had a superb time because I was brought up in the countryside. It was countryside market town workshop at that time, so I was brought up in the countryside with lots of friends, the sons of coal miners, and a great time. It gave me a great advantage in looking at nature, as it were, and developing into the country. I might not otherwise have done that in Sheffield.
At the age of 16, Eric left grammar school to become an apprentice electrician in the steelworks. He was there for the next 5 years. Following that, in 1953, he joined the army and saw his national service out both in England and in Germany. One of the places he was posted to happened to be Arborfield, near Reading.
While I was in Arborfield, we invited the nurses from the Royal Berks to a cocktail party, and I met Betty for the first time and decided that I would keep in touch with her. So throughout my year in Germany, I kept in almost daily contact with her. As you know, I like writing, so I wrote a letter practically every day to tell her what was happening. And eventually, when I came back, I went back to the steelworks, as I said, and after a couple of years, we married, and Betty came back with me to Sheffield. But she didn't like Sheffield, and it was a filthy industrial city in those days, and she will deny this, but she persuaded me that I ought to look for a job in the south.
At first, Eric and Betty lived with her parents in Woodcote, then they moved to Purley, and then, in 1964, with their 3 children, they moved to Whitchurch-on-Thames.
And so we moved to Whitchurch, to Swanston Field, and we've been here, as I said right at the beginning, we've been here for 55 years. I've tried to escape, but I've failed. My hobby that I developed was walking. I think I was probably one of the only people in the village who actually put boots on and walked. My family did, of course, they didn't have any choice. They had to. So my hobby of walking developed there, and hobby of local walking. So I've walked extensively from Reading, basically as far across as Wallingford, everything in sight. I think I've walked every footpath. I haven't written about all of them. Our first Labrador, I've forgotten how long. Anyway, I walked her when I could, when I was not working. I walked her, particularly at the weekends, and walked on the roads. So you could go down Hardway Road and up the Path Hill and round to Whitchurch. And I thought, this is stupid. There must be some other way of walking around other than on the road. So I then searched for footpaths and started to use the footpaths. Quite a number were available, but there were also quite a number that were not in use. And gradually, as I developed them, I reported to the parish council once a year at the annual meeting as to the condition, and they were very, very good. If we said a sow was broken, they would make every attempt to make sure it was repaired. If there was a footpath that was blocked, the parish council would take it on to address whoever, the Oxfordshire County Council or SODC or the landowner, to try and get it repaired. Many of the footpaths were then not open. It took me a long time to find some of them and to open them up. I did find them and did open them up. So I developed that, and the parish council kindly not only took that information on board, but eventually invited me to join the parish council in the same situation of reporting on the footpaths and contributing, I hope, to the decisions of the council. I then started to write them up in the parish magazine to say to people, why don't you come and walk with me or walk this way. In the days gone by, people would read about the walks, but very few took them or walked them, very few. And if I said I would take people walking, hardly anybody would turn out, if anybody. I was persuaded, I think, by Susan Lee and other people to produce the walks into some booklet form. And so the Whitchurch Society financed the booklet to produce. So I wrote up some of the walks that I've been reporting on and gave a map so that people could follow them. And it's in its 6th edition, and I hope that if I can extract my digit, I'll finish the 7th one. It'll be the final one, because there's about 7 years between each edition, so I don't think I'm going to see the 8th, but I'll try and get the 7th done, because there is now a big change in the community that requires information about walking. When I did the first village walk, and I did a series of those until I was ill for a number of years, 4 times a year for a number of 10 years, I think, I did a series of those. But when I did the first one, 100 people turned out on New Year's Day, and we've had that number turn out with me again. Normally a number would be sort of 40 or 50, but we had 100 on one other walk too, which is a hell of a lot of people to control.
But to Eric, these are much more than just walks. They're also journeys through Whitchurch's long and varied and interesting history.
Basically, we're standing on a very historical part of the village, because if you look north from here, directly up above us is an Iron Age, or the edge of what was an Iron Age encampment. There's 57 acres up there, which we think would have been occupied by the Iron Age people as a settlement rather than a fort, but they would have a very good view of the river from up there. But to the west of it, Bowsdown House, which is above Bowsdown Farm, have excavated and come up with Bronze Age artifacts. So you can start off with the Bronze Age to your left, as it were, looking west, Iron Age straight above us. If you spin round and look down the drive, you see the Edwardian stud. Then if you turn a little bit further, you see the old tennis court, first real tennis court, but beyond it is Hardwick House. And Hardwick House is built on the site of the old Saxon manor. So basically, in that spinning your head through 165 degrees, you've scanned something like 4,000 years of history.
As well as taking note of the local history on his daily walks, Eric also is always on the lookout for any problems that might arise that will affect the local walking community, as the saga of the Hartley Steps shows. The bridle path to Hartslock, which by the way is the Tudding part of the Tudding Way, more of that, has it's part of the Thames path, and along the whole length of the Thames path there is only one slope, one hill, and that's actually the dip into Hartslock Wood and out again, approaching Hartslock Wood. As you go down the slope and up the other side, as you reach the top, you're on the western boundary of the village, the old village. Eventually, the horse riders persuaded somebody to put in horse steps, which are big fat slabs all the way down, to allow them to go down under steady state conditions. And many years later, a cyclist tried to cycle down them, fell, and was injured and sued the council. And they decided the best response they had was to take the steps out. So they removed them without any thought, without telling us, which was they were bound by the code of practice to tell us, but they didn't tell the village. They didn't do that. Just removed them and then regraded the slope. The regrading the slope was highly dangerous, and the whole thing was a nightmare. And I found out what they'd done, and I wrote to Oxfordshire County Council, SODC, and complained bitterly, and the Thames Path people, about what they'd done and the fact it was dangerous. And I used my
health and safety credentials to say it is dangerous. And I kept saying it, and I wrote, I think it was 200 odd emails. It took me something like 16 months of corresponding with them before I persuaded them that it would be a good idea if they replaced them. And even that was only brought about by a further accident where a guy was severely injured by slipping at the top, going down the slope, the slippery slope, and cascading into the barbed wire at the bottom. And he also sued them, and without dwelling on it too much, they used all my emails as the evidence that they'd been told it was dangerous over and over again.
Thanks to his dogged persistence, the steps have now been restored.
They've been very worthwhile, and they've been a boon to a lot of people.
Appropriately, the steps have now been named in his honour. And every day, as has been the case for the last 55 years, Eric and his dog can be seen walking those many footpaths around Whitchurch that he helped to open up over all these years. Truly, a man who is at one with his community and his environment.